What's up, guys? Rotozap here, and today we're going to be reviewing the brand new dev diary put out by Ratbeard and all the hot fixes that came out of last night's maintenance. So I was not expecting a dev diary this long, so even though the video is called a reaction, I have already gone through and read everything because I didn't think you guys want to sit through and have me read everything as a live reaction. So instead of doing that, I am just going to be kind of summarizing each of these headings here and giving my opinion on whether or not they're good or bad things and everything in between. So we're going to start this off here with matchmaking. So there's nothing really to say here. I mean, that they said that they believe that they fixed most of the issues. I mean, they identified the two issues that were present to begin with, which is long queue times and mismatching. So yeah, I mean, they claim that it's fixed, but again, as far as all this goes, we just kind of have to wait and see as players as we fill the queue up, because that's really the only way to test it. Now, of course, I'm sure, I mean, you can test it locally, right? I'm sure that they were putting in dummy things into the matchmaking server to see how it reacted and stuff. Like, I'm sure that they've already done testing themselves, so I believe them when they say that it's fixed, but we'll have to see, right? It's always it's always interesting when things come to live. That's when we can see whether things are really fixed or not. So next up is Maycast. Now there's actually quite a bit here to say about Maycast. So they've acknowledged that there's still Maycasts that feel like they swing games too much and occur too frequently. Specifically, they identified a lot of the auras like Brace, Fortify, and what has been a rising problem in the last couple weeks, which is blades like Balance Blade, Dragon Blade, and D-Lance. So what have they done to fix it? Well, first thing that is kind of important is that they specifically said that they're forking the changes for PvE and PvE in terms of Maycast. So what they're saying here is that the changes they apply to PvP Maycast will not transpire over into PvE. They're doing a kind of like a separate tree. When they say fork, that really to me is like it's like a software development term for things when you branch off of the master into something else. So they're kind of just saying that they're doing things on an independent path for now on, right? And that's kind of the road that they've been on, where they've been trying to kind of fork things that have been happening in PvE and PvP, which I think makes sense, and I think a lot of players are going to be happy with. The other thing too is that they're changing a lot of this so that spell done is the trigger for most Maycasts. So that would mean that passing, fizzling, and other things will not trigger pet casts anymore, which is a really good thing, right? Because you shouldn't be rewarded for passing, and you shouldn't be rewarded for fizzling either. So the other thing too is that they said that they're changing most triggers as appropriate to watch for only spell casts upon your opponent. So we're going to get into more of that a little later because they go into more depth of what that actually means. But essentially, they're changing Maycast triggers into one of two types. It's either reactive or some other word. I don't really remember. We'll see it when we see it, right? When we come down to it. But it's like reactive and another thing. And basically, they have kind of two different meanings. So next up, they're addressing the meta and the slow pace. So they acknowledge that basically they slow down the meta to the point where players are no longer having fun and games are frequently going to timer, and it's kind of just a big problem. So they do overall go into Maycast too, because right now in the meta, or I guess not right now, ever since it's changed, but basically, I mean, a shield was never a bad move last week, right? Like a week from making this, a shield was almost never a bad move, right? Because you're gaining a pip off it, you're preventing damage being dealt to you, and there's just no downside. And if you have a pet that has Maycasts, it's actually even better because you can get a Maycast off it, right? So you can shield and get a brace, you could shield and get a D-Lance, shield, get a balance blade. You could even pass and get those things. But now that is hopefully not going to be a thing. And even though you could be saying, well, Maycast, didn't they speed up the meta? Yeah, not really in a good way. So they're trying to speed up the meta in a healthy way, not the really bad way that it kind of was being sped up by Maycast unintentionally. So the hot fix that they did. So these are also, first of all, the big things on the chopping block here. Maycast Outlaws Courtesy, Maycast Mana Burn. So these are two specific wands that had Maycast. Outlaws Courtesy was just a really broken mana burn, and Maycast Mana Burn is self-explanatory. And then, of course, the pet talents, Dragon Blade, Dragon Lance, Balance Blade, Brace, and Fortify, have also all been adjusted so that they have reduced casting rates, which is good because I think a lot of players were really unhappy that, if a player was getting slightly lucky, that meant that they were getting multiple D-Lance casts in a very short period of time, and that makes the game very unfun to play. So they've kind of nerfed all these, and thank God they nerfed the wand Maycast because that was really dumb. But hopefully now people won't be spamming these wands, and hopefully games won't be being ruined as often by these 5 spells here. So, PvP combat stat adjustment. So this is another interesting thing. So now the limit function for damage is going to start at 125 instead of 100. So you will be receiving a 1-for-1 ratio of your damage until 125. Before, it was 100, and if you had 125 damage, that usually translated to, if I'm not wrong, about 117 or 118. So now, if you have up to 125 damage, right? So if you're sitting at like 123, 124, or even 125, you will get 100% of that damage. None of it will be taken away from you. And depending on how the limit function is set up, it could also mean that you might not actually take heavy losses on your damage until you approach around 150. That might not be true. We'll have to play around with our stats, see how that actually looks. But based on this change, it could be back. Like before, it was kind of unreasonable to have anything higher than like 135 damage. But now I think probably having 135 damage is a perfectly reasonable amount to have because you're not going to be losing a lot of it. So we'll have to see how this affects things. But, it should definitely speed up the meta because everyone should be able to do more damage now, except for the one school that needed it, which was Life, because Life doesn't get anywhere near 125. Anyway, so for all the other schools besides Life, this is a really good change because, Ice didn't really need more damage, and Life that kind of needed more offensive options. They can't really reach 125 without sacrificing some other stuff. So for them, it's not great, but for everyone else, they can go back to being more aggro, which is kind of cool. So next up is the matchmaking sort order, and basically they just kind of changed the priority in which people queue. Now it's going to be based on tier, level band, rank, and rating. So I believe tier is like someone that has shadow magic versus someone that doesn't. That's just an example. Level band is obvious. That's the difference between the two players' levels. Rank is the actual like badge that they have. So like warlord or private or captain or commander or whatever. And then rating is the actual score that they have. So like, let's say 1,000 rank versus, whatever versus 1,001 rank. That's not possible in the current system, but just an example, right? That's what rating is. That's what rank and level band, tier, etc. is. So another thing that they implemented again is the restore option prompt. So now you can actually opt in to mismatches, which is pretty solid. So now players are able to, I guess, if they're really sick of waiting for a match or the queue is kind of low, they can opt into getting a match faster and have it be at the expense of versing someone that maybe isn't an appropriate match for them, right? So this is really good. If you guys saw my how to fix queue video, which is something I put out a couple weeks ago, this is something that I directly said that they should have done, and it looks like they implemented it, which is really nice. So changes to the queue parameters as well. So this is kind of interesting because now the wait time in between two players matching is going to be 3 minutes instead of 5. So that's kind of cool. But yeah, I mean, as far as like, is this really going to be impactful? I don't know. Like, it should be. It should help things a little bit, but it's not going to be that much. I think like the opt-in is definitely going to cut down on queue times more than the changes to queue parameters. But next up is a huge thing that they've kind of just buried in with everything else, and that is that PvP is free to play right now. Yeah, you heard that right. Free to play. You don't need a membership. This is huge news. I have been playing this game for God knows how long, and I don't think that this has ever been a thing. So I mean, I just don't even know what to say, right? This is a huge deal, and I highly, highly encourage you guys to just try out ranked or get back into ranked. It doesn't matter if you don't have the right gear. Nothing matters. Your rank doesn't matter. Just get into the queue, show the devs that people are interested in playing PvP, and maybe have some fun. I don't know. But they need more people in the queue so that they can get better feedback, better data analytics for their testing purposes. And they also need to see that people are actually interested in this so that they continue putting time into it. So for the love of God, get in the queue, start playing some ranked games. Because as we'll see later, your rank doesn't matter and it's going to be reset sooner rather than later. So you might as well have some fun, right, before your rank gets reset. So coming soon. So this is all the stuff that they are planning on doing in either the summer test realm or the summer test realm plus more hot fixes. It's kind of, we'll have to see how that all goes. But so the first thing is health stat changes. So this is a very big deal, right? Because there are some huge discrepancies between Storm Wizards and like the entire other cast of the game. Like Storm Wizards get so much less health than everyone else. It's like, it's shocking, no pun intended. So they're hopefully going to rebalance the health so that there are differences between the schools, but it's not as like blatantly obvious, right? Because right now, the fact that Storm gets around 8k health with full gear on and Ice can get well over 11k is problematic to say the least. So the discrepancy between schools, or the disparity between schools rather, shouldn't be that great. So next up is what I was talking about earlier, which is the pet Maycast section. Okay, active and reactive. Yeah, active, they're basically the same word. So active Maycasts are going to, as it says, help a player build tempo. So these are going to be things that, only happen when you're attacking your opponent, right? Or doing something to your opponent. So basically, I mean, they give the example for team PvP, like when something random happens, your pet isn't just going to randomly trigger a Legion Shield or something like that. And yeah, they're only going to happen when, actually, I think the Legion Shield thing would probably be a reactive, but nonetheless, right? They give the example for team PvP where your pet isn't just going to randomly be interjecting with Maycast unless you're doing something to your opponent. So these are essentially, if I'm gathering this right, active Maycasts are only something that can happen on your turn, and they can only happen if you successfully cast the spell. So yeah, that's kind of a big change, right? Because that means, I mean, D-Lance is an example of an active Maycast. I mean, it says, like, for example, it helps a player build offensive tempo. So these are things like bubbles, blades, auras, things of that nature, right? Those are going to be your active Maycast, and they're only going to trigger now when you do something to your opponent. So you can't do something to yourself, and you can't just pass or fizzle or whatever, right? They have to be something that is cast on them. So reactive, inversely, is kind of the opposite, where reactive Maycasts are going to help slow down tempo instead of speed it up, or shift it back to yourself. So they will trigger in response to what your opponent does, right? So if they buff themselves or shield themselves or damage you, those are examples of reactive Maycasts. And they use specifically the examples of like Steel Ward or Steel Charm and heals, right? Because if your opponent shields, that could trigger a Steel Ward. If your opponent blades, that could trigger a Steel Ward. And when your opponent hits you, that could trigger a heal. Those are all reactive Maycasts, right? Because your pet is reacting to something that your opponent did. They're things that happen on your opponent's turn, not your turn, right? So active Maycast, in summation, are things that can happen based on you doing something to your opponent. And reactive Maycasts are something that can happen whenever your opponent does something in general, right? All they're doing is reacting to your opponent's attack or blade or hit or whatever. So that's kind of the summation, I guess, of how the Maycasts are going to be different. And it sounds like they've kind of implemented this or they're going to implement rather, with all the Maycasts so that they all fall into one of these two categories. And yeah, we'll have to see. We'll have to see how these changes really affect Maycasts and if it fixes things. But so far, and we're like halfway through, I really like what they're doing. These all seem like really positive changes to PvP and are going to really help increase the healthiness of the queue. So moving on to Taunt and Pacify. Cut off a little bit. Taunt and Pacify are also going to be changed. So now every single taunt and every single pacify is going to have the same effect that the Shatterhorn and Grenadier spells do. So if you guys are unfamiliar with that or don't know what that means, so now any taunt effect is going to have the secondary, or it's going to have like the real effect that it should have, right? Because in PvP, these two things really haven't done anything. And that kind of changed with Shadowhorn and Grenadier because those two actually did what Taunt and Pacify were intended to do, right? And that being, Taunt makes it so that your opponent can only hit you, and Pacify makes it so that your opponent cannot directly target you if there's something else on the field, right? So, of course, they don't do anything if it's a 1v1 and you don't have a minion out. But let's say you have a minion out and you don't want your opponent single targeting it. You can taunt your opponent, and then for X amount of turns, that opponent is going to be unable to target the minion, right? They're going to be unable to directly target the minion. They can still use things that are AoE, and it doesn't work like Beguile, so it's not like it'll avoid you or something. But it does make it so that direct targeting becomes impossible either for you or for someone else, right? And obviously Pacify has the inverse effect where if you pacify and you have a minion out, then that opponent is unable to directly target you with anything. So this could be interesting and see how it applies with opponents that go into Shrike, right? Because every school has access to a minion, and I think every school has access to some form of taunt or pacify thing, and I think they learn it from Mortis, the death tree in the night side. I think that's where they learn it from, but I'm pretty sure everyone has access to this. So it could be interesting to see if people start using this as a Shrike counter to make it so that, you know, your opponent can't hit you while you go into, when they go into Shrike. I know Storm specifically has a Pacify, which could be really interesting because the Storm minion has quite a bit of health, so your opponent is going to be unable to wand it. And yeah, it could be interesting to see how that gets used. But anyway, so next up is going to be treasure card gating. So it's a change that, again, only affects PvP. I mean, anything that they do with the dev diary for PvP is generally going to start, you know, only affecting PvP. But anyway, they're just kind of saying that they want to kind of limit the level at which players can do certain spells and things like that, because, I mean, that makes sense, right? Because they don't want crazy spells being on a level 5, or they don't want a level 10 having access to like a rank 10 spell or something. I don't, that's the impression that I got from this, is that they're kind of just gating off who can actually be using TCs at lower levels. But, you know, it could affect things below max, but it should probably mostly be for like really low levels, right? Like Magus, things like that. So more trainable TCs. So it looks like every school is getting a new trainable spell. That should be interesting. We'll have to see what they come up with. And I mean, there's still so much, guys. We're not even done here. So still to come, right? So these are things that I guess they're things that are not coming in the summer update, but they plan on implementing within the near future, question mark. So the first thing is an Elo system. If you guys are unfamiliar with what that is, that's another thing that I discussed in the Q video, or how to fix Q, because I really do feel like an Elo system would fix a lot of the issues with people have in regards to specifically rank, and it could also help people get matches faster. So the Elo system, as they say here, right now it is a static plus or minus 16 whenever you win or lose a game. So basically an Elo system is not static, it's flexible, and it depends on what the difference in ranking between you and your opponent is, right? So if you verse someone, like let's say for example, you are a 500 rank private going up against a 1000 rank warlord. Okay, I don't even think that that's possible to happen, but for the sake of example, let's say that it is, right? So if you were a private and you won that game, that is a huge upset, and the difference in rank is so great that you might gain like 32 rank off that, right? You might gain a significant amount of rank if you won that game. And similarly, if the 1000 rank person lost that game, then they would probably lose quite a bit of rank. Again, like 32 rank or something like that, because they shouldn't be losing to people with that low of rank, right? So, but inversely, inversely, if the expected outcome happens, which is that the level, or I'm sorry, the rank 500 person loses, because again, that's what we would expect to happen, they would only lose maybe 5 or 10 rank or something like that. They wouldn't lose the full 16 because that would be ridiculous and they shouldn't be punished for versing someone that's obviously well above their skill level. And the Warlord for beating up someone that was essentially free rank, they're not going to get a lot of free rank off it, right? They may only get 5 rank. So that's what the Elo system is. I think that that's way healthier to do things. And as I say, it was initially implemented for chess, but it kind of just makes sense for most competitive games to be using that system because it just logically makes sense, right? And then finally, or not finally, there's 2 more things, but the next big thing is going to be the rank reset. So essentially, they want to implement the Elo system, but they want to do it fresh, right? So your rank is going to be reset when they do this. And I think that that's a good thing because 4th Age has existed for way too long. So many people have fake rank. I think anyone that's mad about this probably has fake rank, but that might be too much of a hot take to say. Honestly, like I have a lot of characters that are warlords. I don't mind that they're doing this because I mean, I want to start fresh, and more importantly, I also want to know that my rank right now doesn't matter, so I can get more creative with what I'm doing, maybe not use the super meta stuff and like actually have fun in ranked PvP for once, because I know that rank doesn't matter and it's going to be reset soon. They will say though that they might be using your pre-reset rank to gauge how high your starting rank is going to be in the reset, but other than that, I mean, your rank is going to be reset, guys, so just have fun with it, right? And if you want to get into PvP for the first time, don't be nervous because even if you do terribly, your rank is going to be reset. So, the new PvP event, currency, and rewards, this is another really big deal. I mean, part of the reason why I think a lot of people don't play PvP is because unless you're like really into PvP itself, like I am, you don't really have any incentive to play. Like the daily rewards for PvP are kind of poo. And what they want to do is implement something a lot more similar to the Decathlon and Beast Move events, etc. So I think if they had a PvP reward shop that was specifically catered to doing things for PvP, that would be absolutely phenomenal. And I would love to see that from them. So that's kind of it. I mean, here's the conclusion. But God, I mean, so much to unpack here. But anyway, I think that this is really positive. Like overall, I mean, these are all really good changes, honestly. Like, I'm not sure how I feel about some of the stuff, like the crit multiplier being changed and the damage cap increasing. We'll have to see how that actually affects things in PvP. But other than that, I mean, these are really good changes overall. Like, I'm very excited about the PvP being free to play. I'm excited that they claim that the queue is fixed and that really annoying pet Maycast have been fixed. And yeah, we'll have to see kind of how this affects stuff. But yeah, I think it's going to change the pet meta, definitely. I think people are going to start remaking pets because a lot of people have balance blade pets that aren't usable anymore. A lot of people took triple damage off their pets because having triple damage didn't really make sense. But we might start seeing the return of triple damage and some other stuff. So I'm excited to see where this leads things. I want to know what you guys think in the comments below. But yeah, I'm just really excited that it seems like they're taking this a lot more seriously than I thought they were in terms of fixing PvP. So yeah, we'll just have to see how all this actually impacts things. And yeah, I'll catch you guys in the next video. Or what is that about? Peace.